Hello. Today I want to introduce a concept. Elon is well known as being a leader in higher education and experiential learning. I want to introduce and seed the concept of something I like to call experiential assessment. Now, from the title of the talk, you might think that I'm talking about taking video games seriously. And in fact, Americans do take video games seriously. They spend 3 hours or more, or many of people do, on that sort of thing. And likewise, these games that you see in front of me are the biggest selling games we have in the world, making billions of dollars each. This is serious time and serious money. Educators take games seriously too. The concept of gamification in education for training or for advertising to try to draw your audience in a more engaged way became a big thing in 2010. I was working on that sort of thing back in 2006 with students in my astronomy classroom, and in the decade since then, that's become a big thing with even major publishers like W.W. Norton, who has released an astronomy video game to replace the textbook homework problems with something designed for their students. That said, having worked on this for over a decade, I learned early on that it wasn't necessarily how students were playing through and earning points in the game, but the things that they might create on their own with those tools. And I still do that. I still consider that a powerful thing to do with students, doing it with virtual reality now rather than their laptops. But that said, something that was missing in that slide is that over half of our students are not video gamers. Over half of them might shy away from a lesson if you require them to play with video games. And so, in 2007, shortly after starting that project, I said, let's try another project and switch to something a non-video game. The Reacting to the Past series, created by historians who had no interest in video games, but they created a series of games that centered on the classic texts of Galileo, of Plato, of Confucius, and had students be in teams debating this in a historical setting at a different time. You can think of it kind of like Model UN, but on steroids and with a time machine. And so here's some of my Elon students doing this, Michael Sneed and Ripton Rosen. It's an engaging pedagogy where students argue with each other, but I think the most impressive thing to me personally in this is that Ripton here has already left Elon and come back to play this game. He's already taken the class, he enjoyed it, but he wanted to still participate in it. And he was one of the best Reacting to the Past players I had, as well as his friend Michael Sneed. This is something that does engage students. It does more than that, though. The psychology studies of it done by Steven Stroessner show that students in these sorts of classes don't just learn the content, they learn some valuable things like how to empathize with others, which I think we're sorely in need of in America today. My research on it shows how students speak and how these sorts of games can change how vocal they are in a class. If any of you have taught or been in a college classroom with a discussion, you're probably aware that some students speak very little and often one or two students seem to dominate the class. How do we change that? And so by studying how these classes do that, from day 1 to day 2 to day 4, we're able to sort of equilibrize and have the quieter students speak out more and the louder students be more thoughtful in what they say as that progresses and if you structure the game correctly. Something else that came out of studies with other Elon colleagues was that a driving factor in these games is the competition built into the game. And if any of you remember Super Bowl games from the 80s, if it turns into a blowout where one side's clearly going to win and one side's clearly going to lose, both sides quit preparing and realizing that it's an instructor's job to keep it interesting, to have the students right on the edge of where they know they aren't going to necessarily succeed, but they also don't think they're going to fail. That's an important place to be in education. That said, I wanted to look into some other tools that weren't as competitive. And if any of you know Anthony Weston, a philosophy professor that recently retired from here, he's probably the least competitive person I knew at Elon. And his approach to working in the classroom followed the impresario with a scenario, creating something in the classroom that would engage the students in a way that wasn't necessarily a game, but was more playful. And that really paired nicely with what I wanted to do. We ended up teaching an honors class, an interdisciplinary class looking at the philosophical and the scientific ways in which society, which humans look for extraterrestrials, which is an interesting question to pull honors students into. We decided at the end of that first year of teaching the class to offer a very interesting, different final exam, probably the least number of instructions in any exam in the history of exams. Students walked into a room and found this. An 8-foot-tall black monolith. No instructors, no desks, just 4 video cameras pointing at that. What would you do if this was your final exam and you were an honor student very interested in your grades? They spent 30 minutes just touching it. They'd take their selfies with it. They'd call their parents like, oh my God, what is going on with this exam? And then after 30 minutes, they got to work. And half of them went across the campus looking for a second monolith. A handful of them stayed in looking for clues in the room. Maybe there's something special about the number of pens that are on the whiteboard. There was. But then they'd start to do things that were even almost magical. They knocked the monolith down. They treated it as a little mini conference table and started to ask themselves the questions that any teacher or any provost or any president would be proud to hear students ask. Like, what did we learn in this class? And how are we different as people for having taken it? And no one asked them that. We just put a black box in the room, literally. And then after 2 hours, they did what even in spite of the fact that we filled it with concrete blocks so that they wouldn't move it, they moved it. They put it out into the middle of the quad to share with the rest of the campus. This was a very open-ended part of the exam. We didn't know how they would respond. But I wanted there to be something I'm a scientist. I wanted there to be a little bit something more multiple choicey. Interesting, but still with an answer. And so I whisked them away in two white vans to a backyard where they opened the door and 3 chickens, which I had trained, approached the door. And on a table were 3 barbecue chicken pizzas, 3 cheese pizzas, and a bowl of sunflower seeds. What would you do? This one actually had answers that were better than others. Why? Because a month beforehand, they'd done a different exercise where I had worked with half of the class sort of in secret to create a futuristic astronauts, trillionaires that were exploring space hundreds of years in the future, going from planet to look for intelligent life, and then if they didn't find intelligent life, they would harvest the resources from that planet to fund the next search for extraterrestrial life. They encountered Anthony Weston's half of the class, the Aurorans, a series of cat-sized, tree-dwelling aliens that were living peacefully on this planet until our astronauts, the kick astronauts, landed on that planet, captured one of them, took it to their spaceship, ran tests on it, decided that they weren't that intelligent, went down, captured the rest of them, and sold them back on Earth as pets. The human students were excited. They'd survived the mission. They were going to be able to fund new things. They were literally dancing. The Auroran students were mortified. They'd created a culture over the course of the past month with a religion, a background, a language, and all of a sudden they were captured and sold as pets. In our debriefing of this, the next day to sort of come back together, we realized humans are really bad. They're bad to anything that they think is inferior, and that's what played out. And the students swore, we get it. Like, we know what we did. We will be better people because of this. Now, if we asked them a multiple choice exam, they would say that, but we wanted to test them. And so, back on Animal Planet, on Chicken Planet, one student came up, he sees what's going on, he's like, do chickens eat sunflower seeds? I think we're supposed to do something with the chickens. Another student said, no, we're just supposed to eat. And then within 2 minutes, all the pizza was gone. I was hoping that they would not eat alien pizza in front of the aliens in this thing, in this scenario. But they didn't. That one student was very thoughtful, and here's a sad lesson that comes from this one, that unchecked, this is what we discussed with the students afterwards, unchecked, thoughtless action will trump thoughtful inaction. That was a powerful takeaway. I mean, it's a silly exercise when you're training chickens, but the takeaway was powerful. We ran this, a different scenario completely 2 years later, because we'd already published that one so they could find it online. So 2 years later, we give them both literal and figurative lenses to explore Alamance County, to go to different exits and see what does society look like if you were not human. They decided that our society is built to cater to the metallic four-wheeled creatures that dominate it. And there are mysterious lights and towers that, these metallic four-wheeled creatures are controlled by. 2 years after that, we had a talking trash can, which thanks for the permission to do that. I appreciate that, Stephen. And so we had a talking trash can that was asking them a deep question: who are you? Who are you? And trying to get them to go from saying, I'm Bob, I'm a biology major, to saying, well, no, here's how we humans fit into the tree of evolution, and here's where Earth is as a planet. We started with just our own cameras, but in the end, we realized everyone's walking around these days with their own video camera, and the students could record and share their own perceptions of how they solve this problem. That's a very powerful thing, and probably the best grading and most fun grading you'll do in your lifetime is watching students try to solve this. Now, I've presented the amusing cases that come with a class about aliens. This works in an astrophysics class where I have them try to solve a problem. And you learn not what ethics they learn, but maybe what equations they learn. And watching them try to solve the problem, seeing how they address that, is more important, I would argue, than the actual answer itself that they provide at the end. So, experiential assessment, I would suggest, along with games and scenarios, is perhaps another tool in the toolkit that we in education should consider as we try to figure out not what students say they learned, but what they actually learned. Thank you.